So why don't you call it to order, and then I'll do a roll call.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, it's a little after 5:30, so we're going to call this meeting to order. And Brandon, can you do a roll call?
Thank you. So since this is a special joint meeting of the City Council and the Housing Ad Hoc Committee, we are going to do a roll call. Councilmember Barron.
Here.
Councilmember Richards.
Here.
Councilmember Ferlito.
Here.
Mayor Potter.
Here.
Well, hello. Gotcha. And Councilmember Dramov. Okay, is she?
Yes.
Okay, super. So we have a quorum of the City Council, which means we can proceed with the special meeting of the City Council and the Housing Ad Hoc Committee. As we all know, Councilmember Ferlito and Mayor Pro Tem Richards are the Ad Hoc Committee for Housing, but we do have the full City Council. I'll look to the Ad Hoc Committee at this point and ask if it's all right with you for me to do a brief intro of what we're here for, and then I'll turn it over to you to sort of speak to the crowd, but I just wanted to give a quick overview if that's all right with you.
That's perfect, Brandon.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, this is a special meeting of the City Council and the Ad Hoc Committee. So we may have a few members of our boards and commissions, Planning Commission, that may be joining us throughout the evening, which is fine as well. So I wanted to welcome everyone from the public and thank you for coming today. We've got a great turnout. We've got about 25 people on Zoom, and the room's basically full. We appreciate the turnout from the community, our council members, of course, our boards and commissions. And I'm going to turn it back over to our Ad Hoc Committee here in a moment. But the format for this evening, basically what we're going to do is we'll have a welcome and introduction from our council members about what we're doing, and then we have a staff presentation. It's a longer presentation, so we appreciate your patience as we go through it. And then I believe your Ad Hoc Committee is going to be looking for feedback. In our presentation, you'll see at the end we have 3 very basic questions we're looking for feedback on tonight. Of course, any other feedback is very welcome. But there's some specific pieces of feedback we're looking for tonight. So with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our Ad Hoc Committee, Mayor Pro Tem Richards and Councilmember Ferlito, to welcome and get us started.
Great. Well, thanks, Brandon. Karen, would you like to add anything to or start this off? Because
I would just like to say it's great to see so many people involved, because what we are doing through this process is not only looking at our RENA allocation numbers, but we are also, in a way, creating community. And we create community by welcoming people into our community to be part of it. And I just think that this can be a very positive and forward-looking solution. And we're here to listen today. We'd like to hear lots of positive and forward-looking ideas, because we have to think out of the box on this one. So with that.
yeah, I'll go. Well, I can look around, and I know I've talked to many of you guys personally, and also have read emails and the different things. I want everybody to understand that it's not that the City Council or this Ad Hoc Committee is trying to push this issue. We're just trying to adhere to what the state has asked us to do. What we do with that, we won't know until after this Ad Hoc Committee submits a recommendation to the council. But for right now, what we want to try to do is create something positive, something that's going to help us get over this hurdle of what the state has asked. None of us are happy about what the state is mandating on several different issues. Not just this, but we see it as them taking a lot of zoning away from the control of the cities. And none of us like that. But still in all, we have to move forward with what they've asked to do. And I think that by trying to move forward with it, at least we're getting ahead of the game. And I think Brandon will explain some of the hammers, as Karen says, that come down on us if we don't do some of these exercises and provide some incentives or whatever they may be, some changes to our zoning that would allow some of this housing to happen. Brandon, would you like to expound on that now or later on?
I think that the staff between Marnie Waffle, our principal planner, Catherine Wallace, our associate planner, and our wonderful teammate from EMC Planning, Andy Flowers, they have a presentation tonight that will cover that.
Okay, so what we're hoping from the city, from the residents, is to give us ideas and some thoughts of what we might be able to do. And I'm glad to see the American Legion is here. Thanks for coming, guys, because I reached out to them and said, hey, you know, how could we create something for some of our vets to live in this town? What could we do? Is there something that we could do at the hall? And so everything is on the table. And so I appreciate you guys coming. And well, let's get this started.
I would like to say one other thing now that Bobby mentioned it. You know, this isn't the state doing something evil to us for a bad reason or anything. It's their quest to have a home for every Californian. And we're really, really short of homes in our state. So this is a way of creating an opportunity for every community to take part in creating some of those homes. Were we going to formally introduce Andy here? Okay. You're going to? Or? Would you like to do it now? Yes, I'd like to introduce Andy Flower, is a principal planner at EMC Group when the city has contracted with the EMC to write our housing element. And Andy comes to us with a lot of experience, and EMC is working on housing elements for many, many cities in California. So we will be able to enjoy reaping the benefit of some of those cities that have gone before us in this process. So Andy, welcome. And he'll have a little part in a little while to share with you some information.
All right, well, thank you both ad hoc members. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marnie Waffle.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate your participation, and we are looking forward to your feedback as we continue on in this process. If you were with us in November for our first community meeting, some of this information may sound very similar. We are going to do a recap of that information, also a little bit of a summary of what we heard at that community meeting, and then talk about a few new things as well. So this is our agenda for the evening. So we've done our introductory remarks. I'm going to give you an overview of the housing element, what we heard at the first community meeting. And then I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to present some slides as well. And then we also have another consultant of ours on Zoom, Chris Blakeney, and he's going to present some slides on the housing feasibility study that was recently completed. And then we will kind of wrap it up with a discussion of development constraints and potential incentives. So I want to start with the mission statement that our Housing Ad Hoc Committee has come up with. And this is what's guiding our process as we proceed with our housing element update. So the mission of the Housing Ad Hoc Committee is to provide guidance as the city updates the housing element of its general plan. The committee will participate in public outreach and education, consider opportunities and incentives for the development of affordable housing, and explore creative and tailored solutions to meet the city's workforce and range of other housing needs while preserving the character of Carmel-by-the-Sea. So next we're going to show a somewhat short video. It's about 6 minutes long, but it gives an excellent overview on housing elements and why we are undertaking this process. So I'm going to go ahead and start the video. Sebastian, can you help me with the sound?
might just have to skip the video and send the link out to everybody.
Okay, so I apologize for that.
We'll make a link available. So we'll make a link available for the video for everyone, and we'll send that out to everyone that attended tonight.
The video is really very, very nice. I'm sorry that it's not working. Is there any way we could possibly get it fixed?
We'll work on it while Marty gives the rest of the presentation.
All right. Okay, so the housing element is part of our general plan. And our general plan is really our blueprint for our community. It contains a number of different chapters covering a variety of topics, including land use, circulation, transportation, public facilities, coastal resources. So the housing element is one of the state-required chapters, so to speak, in the general plan. And state law does require us to update it on a regular basis. We're currently on an 8-year cycle. And so our existing housing element was from 2015 to 2023, and that is coming to an end. So we are working on our next update, which will take us through the next 8 years. So specifically, the housing element includes goals, policies, programs, and objectives to meet the housing needs of the community. And again, we're updating it on an 8-year cycle. We are required to submit the plan to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They review the plan for compliance with state law, and then they certify it when it is complete. So the plan addresses housing opportunities for all income levels. This includes market rate housing as well as housing for lower income households. So when we talk about affordable, the general standard is that a household should not spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing, including utilities. In the current state of things today, many households are paying 30% or more, and some are even paying upwards of 50% of their income on housing costs. And we call this severely cost burdened. So I'm sure, as many of you know, housing in California is quite expensive. And so one of the goals of the housing element is to provide a range of housing options that allow people of all income levels to live closer to where their jobs are, housing options that accommodate the needs of families, and then also housing options that allow people to age in place. So when we talk about living closer to where you work, this means shorter commutes, fewer vehicle miles traveled on our roadways, and also reduced environmental impacts. So housing is really tied into a number of things, quality of life, as well as the quality of our environment. So starting at the state level, the state of California has determined that we need 2.5 million homes across the state to meet the current need. And they've broken this down by income level. So a little over 1 million homes at the market rate, or what we sometimes call above moderate, and about 1.5 million affordable to lower income households. After the state determines what the statewide need is, they divide it up among the different regions throughout California. And we are in a region that is governed by the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. We call them AMBAG. And so AMBAG's responsibility is to take the region's share, which is 33,274 units, and divide that up among the 18 cities and counties within our region. And that consists of Monterey County and Santa Cruz County. Then at the local level, each city and county gets their allocation. So right now, we are starting the 6th cycle, the 6th RENA cycle. And this cycle, we have been allocated 349 units. And these are new housing units that that we need to plan for over the next 8 years, so from 2023 to 2031. The state does recommend that we include a buffer, so we plan for a little bit more than 349. So in the event that some of the sites don't develop as we maybe hope for, we still have additional sites available that could meet the need during the planning period. So this pie chart kind of gives you an idea of how the region's housing need has been divided up, again, among the 18 cities and counties in our area. Carmel is in the bottom 3 of the allocation, just behind or above Delray Oaks and Sand City. You can see in our neighboring jurisdiction of Pacific Grove, they were assigned over 1,100 units, and Capitola was assigned over 1,300 units. So needless to say, the allocation for this cycle is quite large. There certainly is a need for housing, and everyone is feeling a larger allocation this round, not just us. So again, in the 5th RHNA cycle, which is what we're in right now, our allocation was 31 housing units. And now we are planning for 349. So quite an increase. Those allocations are also broken down by income level. So you can see the comparison here on the screen. For the 5th cycle, we were planning for 11 very low, 5 low, 6 moderate, and 13 above moderate, which is essentially market rate. And you can see the difference of what we're going to be planning for this cycle. So we really need to get creative and find solutions for how we plan for that number of units in a very small village that is currently built out. And that's where everyone in the community comes into play. We're really looking for some creative ideas and solutions on how we can plan for this number of units. So you might be wondering how we did during the 5th cycle. So we are still in it. We're in the tail end of it. Our preliminary data shows that we have produced 21 new housing units. And some of these are new single-family homes that were on vacant lots. And a greater portion of these are accessory dwelling units that have been permitted. So these are all above moderate or market rate. We have not produced any lower income housing during this cycle. But again, we have a plan in place. We did our best to implement that plan, and those lower income housing units just didn't come to fruition. So we're tasked at this point in trying to figure out why and how we can try to do better and incentivize those units in the next cycle. So this is our timeline. It's pretty aggressive. We are getting started just a tad late, but we are certainly ready to hit the ground running. We've completed the housing feasibility study, which we're going to talk about in more detail this evening. And then we've also entered into our consultant contract with EMC. And Andy Flower, again, is here this evening, and we'll be presenting a few slides in just a bit. So we're going to be doing a lot of community outreach. This is our 2nd community meeting. We have more community meetings that are planned, and we certainly hope that you all stick with us through the process. We're going to be developing new programs. We're working very closely with the state so that when we submit our updated housing element, it meets their requirements, and we can obtain certification. So in the summer is when we're targeting to get a draft to the state for their 90-day review period. And then we're hoping by the fall we can respond to any comments they have and then meet the deadline for certification by December 15th. Some other actions that need to be taken as part of this process, we will need to do some environmental review. If anyone is familiar with the California Environmental Quality Act, it's It's another state law that requires us to look at the environmental impacts of our updated housing element. So that effort will be ongoing during probably the summer and the fall. The update to our housing element also requires that we amend our general plan and local coastal plan. So that will be an action that will be taken by the city council. Also, there's a newer state law that requires when cities update their housing elements to also kind of take a look at their safety elements in light of the wildfires that have been happening throughout the state. We'll be taking a look at our safety element and seeing what needs to be updated to address those issues. So we'll be doing that concurrently with the housing element update. Also, if we need to do any rezoning in order to meet our housing need, that will be something that we look at as part of this process. And then we'll be implementing the document over the next 8 years. So this effort is funded entirely by grants. We were successful in obtaining 3 grants. The Senate Bill 2 grant was $160,000. The LEAP grant was $65,000, and the REAP grant was $65,000. So this entire effort to update our housing element is funded by these grants. We've received $290,000 so far. And there will be an additional opportunity of up to $125,000 for implementation of our housing element after it's certified. So we talked a little bit at our last community meeting about what if we don't do this? What if we tell the state 349 is just too many units for our community and we don't want to do this? What are some of the consequences of not having that certified housing element? And a lot of laws have been passed in recent years so that this is no longer just a paper exercise. The state is taking this very seriously. They have put in place the ability to fine jurisdictions, and that could be between $10,000 to $100,000 per month. That you do not have a certified housing element. And if that's not enough to encourage you to get your element certified, they can triple that fine amount. And if that doesn't work, then they can, quadruple it, sextuple it. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So we certainly don't want to find ourselves in that position where the state is going to levy fines against us because we haven't updated our housing element. There's also a builder's remedy is kind of the term that's being used. And it's sort of a loophole in the law that allows developers to build a project that has up to 20% low-income units or 100% moderate-income units by right. So we lose our authority to review or regulate a project if we don't have a certified housing element. Another consequence is that we would be ineligible for certain grant funding. The state really is using funds as a way to encourage cities to have a certified housing element. In the past, it was tied primarily to transportation funding, but more recently, it could be anything from grants that we might seek to do improvements in Mission Trail Nature Preserve or improvements down at the beach to maybe reinforce our seawall. And then also, grants for, for addressing wildfire risk. So there's a lot of ramifications. There's a lot of state money that we could potentially miss out on without a certified housing element.
Marty, do you mind if I stop you just for a second and go back to the builder's remedy situation? Just to clarify for me as well as the residents. So if we didn't have a plan that was adopted by the state, could a developer come in, buy a small, like say a small hotel in a residential neighborhood, I'm just saying, pick one, Green Lantern or something like that, tear it down, say that they're going to build 100% moderate income units, and we wouldn't be able to control that. Is that right?
That is my understanding, yes.
And that's, okay, because that's, I mean, then we really lose all of our zoning code control.
Has that been done
We do.
Has it been done?
in any other communities? Even now,
There are 4,000 units under review right now in Santa Monica.
but it hasn't been done.
These are projects that are now vested.
But it hasn't been done.
No, well, it's fairly new. You know, this is a new RENA number that we're dealing with.
But builder's remedy's been around for decades, but it hasn't been done. It hasn't actually been completed.
Builder's remedy only goes into effect once you, as soon as you pass your deadline for the 6th cycle housing element. So Santa Monica is only, has not been, their deadline got extended, so I can't remember the exact date, but it's been, I think, less than a year. So there were developers who had plans on the ready, and they all dropped them, brought them into the planning department. So these 4,000 units, as is said, this won't be, they won't be issued, they'll only be issued building permits. There won't be any planning regulatory measures through that process, although CEQA does apply. But the planning department is not able to say no according to, say, design guidelines, things like that.
And I think, let me just answer the question more pointedly. The answer is no, none of these have been built yet, but they're in the process right now. So we'll see over the next few months how they shake out. But yeah, the direct answer is no, none of them have been built, but that law, this caveat has been enacted now in the state, so we'll see how it plays out.
Did Santa Monica not have a housing element in place? Is that how this came to them?
It was not certified on time. So if we miss our deadline of December 15th, that period of time between December 15th and when it would become certified would be a gap where builder's remedy would be applied.
And for the benefit of those listening on Zoom, because they can't hear the folks in the audience, so we want to try to save comments for when you're up at the microphone. But the questions were, one, has the builder's remedy has any building been built yet under the builder's remedy? And then the other question was, is the reason that Santa Monica was dealing with that was because they didn't adopt their housing element on time.
And if you don't mind, I would like to set the tone of this meeting a little bit. I know a lot of people are angry about this, and I know a lot of people are saying, hey, we need to fight the state and just say no and go at it like, this really isn't the meeting for that. Those comments should be heard when the ad hoc committee is giving its recommendation to council. Tonight, we're trying to understand what the state wants and help develop a program. Now, whether we go through with that program isn't going to be decided tonight. All we're trying to do is get community input. And if you really are upset about these RENA numbers, then you need to write to your Senator Laird and some of these people. We're just the city trying to work within we're trying to color within the lines that they gave us. And that's all we're trying to do tonight. And so it's really not a meeting where you should be upset or want to fight. We're trying to come up with a solution as best we can. There will be time that you can say, hey, let's say no, let's sue the state. There's other communities that want to as well. But this isn't the meeting for that. This meeting is to really just be proactive and try to figure out the best way to handle what the state has given us, if that helps.
Thank you, Councilmember Richards. We'll let Marnie keep going with her presentation. Go ahead, Marnie.
Thank you. So, I mean, in presenting this slide, it's certainly not our intent to kind of use this as a baton, to kind of beat the community and say we have to do this. But these are very real consequences that have some serious effects on our community. And so we do believe that it is important to develop this plan, see what we can do to accommodate the number of units that have been allocated to us, and avoid these consequences at all costs. So you can see here on the slide, there's a couple other potential consequences, being permit moratoriums, so losing our power to issue permits locally, having an agent be appointed to bring our element into compliance, and then suspension of local land use power. Now, these aren't things that are gonna happen on December 16th if we don't have our housing element certified. It's my belief, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my belief that, you know, these consequences have been put into place for cities that really dig in their heels and don't want to do this at all. There's just really a lack of cooperation, and they have no interest whatsoever in having an adopted housing element. We understand the concerns, and we want to hear from the community. We want to hear the concerns, and we want to try to work together to come up with solutions on how we can do this in a way that fits Carmel best. So again, this is just a slide on some of the grant funding that could be tied to having a certified housing element. I kind of listed these off already. So now I want to kind of transition into what we heard at community meeting number 1. So we are taking copious notes at all of these meetings. We're going to be working with Andy and his team to develop a dedicated website for this project. We will be posting Q&A on that website. So all the questions that we receive, we're going to post those online with answers so that the entire community can benefit from that information. It currently is a work in progress, so we don't have it up just yet. But please know that we do hear you, and we will be paying very close attention to all the feedback that we receive. So at the last community meeting, we heard questions about can we appeal the RENA and join a class action lawsuit. The time period for appeals has passed, so our 349 units is final, and that's what we're gonna be working with. We heard that the city shouldn't dedicate a lot of time to this. We certainly understand that sentiment, but we do need to devote some resources to updating our housing element, and we have a great team with EMC that's going to help us do that. We heard about concerns that some of the incentives for the development of housing may only benefit the wealthy. We certainly do have a obligation to plan for housing for all income levels, and we are dedicated to doing that. We heard that there are some perceived challenges for low-income residents. You know, does the village have the services needed to serve households at all income levels? And that's something we certainly are going to need to explore. We heard a desire to preserve the character of the residential zones. We heard that growth is limited without water, and that's a real issue for us. And we have to go through this process under the assumption that water will become available, knowing very well that if it doesn't, we're not going to be able to build anything. And HCD is aware of this. They know that it is a constraint for us, and it's something that we at the local level don't have a lot of control over. We heard about concern with more cars in Carmel. We heard about concern of loss of character, about subdivision of lots, and then also increases in building height. And all very valid concerns, because these do affect the character of our community.
Well, if HCD knows we don't have the water, so what if they can't be certified by it? Does builder's remedy come into play even if we don't have the water to build it?
We can still get a certified housing element without adequate water resources. That is a constraint that is beyond our control, and it's something that needs to be worked out between the state agencies. So our responsibility is to develop a plan as if we had the water to build the housing, but if we don't get the water, there will not be a penalty.
So we only have to make a plan, we don't have to actually build anything ever.
Right, our job is to develop the plan, and then it's gonna be up to private development and market conditions to construct the units. So we wanna make sure that there are opportunities available for new housing. But again, our job is the plan. We don't have control over what a property owner decides to build or not build. But we wanna come up with opportunities for new construction, incentives for new construction, and that's our obligation.
But if we never, in 8 years, we never built a single unit, would we be in compliance if our element was approved?
Yes.
So for the benefit of those out on the Zoom, the question from the audience was, if we don't have water when we go to get this plan adopted and approved by the state, are we going to get it rejected? And the answer is no, because it's a constraint that the state's aware of and that they just are we have to deal with. And the other question was, if nothing gets built over the 8-year period of this next RENA cycle because there is no water, are we in trouble as a city? And the answer to that was no.
Okay, Marty, keep going.
All right. So additional feedback. No one, again, is being forced to build anything, and the city is not in the business of building housing. We heard about paid parking revenue could fund some underground parking. We heard encouraging ADUs and JADUs as new housing opportunities, which is certainly an option. We heard to take a look at studio apartments and even micro units to achieve some of these new housing units, adding second stories to existing one-story downtown buildings. We do have a recent example of how that can be done and done very well. We heard converting vacant second-story offices to residential. So these are spaces that already exist, and if they're not being used for offices, they could potentially become residential units. We heard retrofitting of hotel rooms, considering sites like the Sunset Center, Vista Lobos, and other properties that might be attractive for housing development. We also heard that the abundance of second homes is a newer phenomenon, and Carmel has supported many more full-time residents in the past. And then this is our last slide on what we heard, posting a list of all ideas, those that are rejected and those that remain under consideration online. And again, we're going to have a dedicated website, and there's going to be a lot of really valuable information that we post up there for the community. Consider the impact of the design guidelines update, increased fees for new builds to start an affordable housing fund, rezoning to meet our housing goals. This is an opportunity to be compassionate and creative, and the Carmel Foundation program has been successful in providing affordable senior housing in our community. So that could be an opportunity to build off of as well. Many workers spend more time in this community than homeowners. No power to require ADUs to be rentals, which is true, but we can certainly incentivize ADUs and count those as new housing units. To control the outcome, we can't combat the state. And then we have talented designers in this community that we are encouraging to come to the table and help us come up with some solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy with EMC Planning Group, and he is going to present the next few slides.
Thank you, Marnie. It's a pleasure and an honor to work with this community, and I sincerely look forward to all the talented creative solutions that will come with our future discussions, and so glad to see such a robust group of people here tonight. So many times when we start off these projects, it's hard to get people engaged. So we're very appreciative that staff has initiated the process with this feasibility study, and that so many of you are engaged and interested in where we take this next. We're a local firm. We're based in Monterey, and we've been in business for over 40 years, providing environmental services, planning services throughout the community and throughout the state. We've worked with several communities for the 5th cycle housing element, and we're still in process with a number of 6th cycle housing elements in Marin County, Santa Clara County, and now we have 2 in Monterey County and Stanislaus County, and we're also working with Monterey County Unincorporated. So between Sand City and Monterey Unincorporated, we're working with sort of the 2 ends of the spectrum for all of the AMBAG region. So we're excited to be here. One of the topics that I like to bring in early in the discussion so that it's understood that this is something that has to get integrated throughout all of our, it's helpful if it's throughout all of our discussions, because it needs to be integrated through all of our decisions and with our final document. This is brand new in the housing element requirement package that HCD makes clear. And it's affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH. It's the law is AB 686, and I'm just going to read through this. It's counteracting patterns of segregation, locating lower income housing in high opportunity areas, and addressing various disparities in housing opportunity. So you're going to see some parts of your housing element that you've never seen before. We dive deep with our analysis of demographic information. We try to tell the story, and we're sort of making up for all these many cycles, all these 5 cycles before this, having not included this. So you're going to see new information, and you're going to see us attempt to tell your story, and we're going to count on you to come in and let us know when it needs to get better filled out with local knowledge, because this is the one piece that is impossible for us as consultants to come in and tell your story entirely. And it's one piece also that HCD over and again is telling communities that they need more information to tell the local story. So we're thinking about the built environment and how it's changed over time, and how and who has lived within the community over time, and who has had access to live in the community, and how we can increase that access to a broader diversity of folks. So housing needs is something that is part of the 5th cycle housing element, but we're going to go deeper. The big picture of HCD's goal is to increase and vary housing opportunities to support diversity within high resource areas. So you can see with these 2 maps that come straight from HCD, because we're already beginning in the background to put all of these chapters and appendices together for your review, that you can see that Carmel is in the highest resource area, and at the same time it has some of the lowest amount of diversity. So we need to keep this in mind when we think about our policies and programs, also the sites that we select. And just to go back to what this chapter will look like, we're going to be learning from the past and writing about it, and we're going to make sure that we future-proof policies going forward, and through that we're going to be attempting to resolve past inequities. So sometimes when we talk about this subject, it can be something that's difficult for people to hear, and I just want to encourage you to understand that this is a requirement, that we're all working on getting that story right together, and it's best if you can think of this objectively and to not personalize the information that you're receiving. So this is an excerpt from the video. These are all the folks who speak within the video to speak about the housing element and who it can impact and what a difference it can make in people's lives. And just early on, I want to let you know that we intend to incorporate all of the voices that are present here tonight and who join our process and tell their story throughout this, including daytime residents, those who are employed within the community, some of whom may like to live here, who can help us understand how best to write our policies so that we may be able to connect the dots with this housing plan and make that come true for people. So timing. We have less than a year to accomplish big housing goals. And I'm going to encourage everyone to think about resiliency. How, as a community, can we take this opportunity to get beyond the anger that almost every community we've worked with has felt towards the RHNA numbers and towards this idea that the state is trying to tell you what to do or give you the goals, set the goals that then you need to meet. If we can instead just recognize this as a great opportunity, your local power is its strongest between now and December in determining how you reach those state goals. So your participation and your ability to help us come up with some positive solutions is integral to a positive plan that we could then get certified. HCD is looking for the solutions that come directly from the community that are unique to each community. So your participation truly matters. We're hoping to have inspired Carmel-by-the-Sea solutions, and we want to help you maintain this local control through this process and beyond. We want to get you certified, adopted and certified on time so that you're not open as a community to the builder's remedy, and so that you can direct the growth to enhance Carmel-by-the-Sea charm. So again, necessary for success, we need your courageous creativity, and what we'll be bringing to the experience is a radical transparency through the entire process. We're going to involve and engage with you. We're going to bring a draft to you very early on and integrate as many of your comments as we can and let you know where you can find those responses to your comments within the document. So we're going to be asking you to respond quickly because this will be a very fast year between now and December. We're going to get through our sites first because we need to make sure that we can have our environmental review for the sites that we're considering. And we look forward to all of your participation and hope for your objective reception of this required data and analysis that we'll be bringing to you for the first time. Thank you.
Andy, can I just say that was great. I loved what you said about our power is the strongest right now. I think that was really a key thing for all of us to think about is right now is where we have the most power until December. So thanks.
Couldn't we just give permits to 349 homeowners to build ADUs and then never build them and get approved? You said we don't actually have to build anything, so why do we have to talk about all this?
I don't think so, Parker. I don't think that Parker. I don't think that would work. We have to because we have.
49 dwelling units.
Parker, excuse me, but if you're going to speak, would you come to the microphone so that the people who are on Zoom can hear you and state what you want to say? We're not going to argue back and forth with this with you there. So other people can't hear what you're saying if you don't come up here and say it to the microphone.
Okay. For Zoom land, the question was, why couldn't we just give 349 free permits for residents to have ADU units that never actually have to be built? Because you just told me we don't actually have to build anything. So why are we rambling on about diversity and equity and all these joyful things?
You asked a question.
Sounds like we're going to be building things, but you said we don't actually have to.
Well, Parker, I think you asked
That
a
was the
question, and can we answer that question with just a no? I mean, it's just no.
Well,
that
so
wouldn't.
the short answer is no. I mean, you're correct, Councilmember Richards. The reason the no is because we're required by the state of California to present a plan that gets approved by the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department. And I guarantee you that if we sent in a plan to the state that says our plan is to approve 349 ADU permits, they're going to say, plan denied, go try again. That's not a plan. So that's, the short answer is no, but that's a little bit longer answer.
And you would also have to find 349 people to go and get these, to go ahead and deed restrict their property and get that permit. And I don't think you'd find it.
Actually, Andy, could you say something about the ADU, how they get counted? Because we've been under we've been hearing different things, like they'd have to be deed restricted. The state does not require them to be deed restricted. The state also does not require ADUs to be rented. But you made a statement the other day about they make an assumption, and I think that's valuable to hear.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I want to begin with the first assumption that they've shared with us is a formula for how many ADUs that we can count, and that's based on how many ADUs have been permitted within the last few years. We get an average of that, and then we project out, we multiply it by 8. And to go beyond that number, it's necessary to show other kinds of incentives. Maybe there's an openness that you provide for within your ADU ordinance that goes a little beyond what the state allows for. So if you're able to show an ADU program that that truly connects the dots and incentivizes folks to want to build an ADU, then you could go larger than that formula number. And I think the other assumption that you're asking about is an assumption that was brought together by ABAG and introduced to HCD, and they did accept it, and that's a 30-30-30-10 assumption for affordability, so that let's say 100 dwelling units would be built in the next 8 years, so 30 of those would be considered very low income, 30 low income, 30 moderate, and then only 10% above moderate or market rate. So ADUs are a good way for highest resource communities to meet those affordability numbers. So it's helpful in that regard. It's also helpful locationally, because it does spread the units throughout the community, throughout the residential neighborhoods, and enables access to resources rather than it all being segregated in one location.
And this is better information that I received this week, because we've been thinking that in order for it to be very low, you would have to deed restrict your property. But that may not be true. So that if this assumption of 30-30-30-10, they're assuming that at some point, many of these ADUs will be rented at an affordable rate. Maybe your son comes home from college and can't find a job, and he decides to live there, and he's not paying you anything. Well, that's very low income. There's some things that we're learning as we go along, and I find that very encouraging, that because we thought all along that the ADUs were only going to count for market rate. So this was new information that we received through Andy just this week. We also talked about there are a lot of guest houses throughout our community that are legal subordinate units, but they're not ADUs. However, perhaps some people would be incentivized to change their guest house into an ADU, and as long as it met the qualifications of an ADU, it had a kitchen, it had a bathroom, and so on, then perhaps that could be counted. And I know personally lots of people who have guest units that might qualify as ADUs. So that's what we're talking about, a creative solution of how to incentivize to people that they might be able to go through the process to convert to an ADU or a junior ADU. Some of you may not realize that a junior ADU doesn't have to be a separate dwelling. It can be part of your home. So this can be a really great solution for someone who needs a companion in the house, wants someone else living on their property to make them feel safer. I know I have a guest house, and when it was rented for many, many, many years, I liked it that someone was there when I was traveling, so that, the house was occupied. And I think we probably have many opportunities to match up, if someone is willing to have a junior ADU, to match them up with people who would be delighted to live in a small unit. When we talk about the people who need housing, I worked in retail in Carmel for many years, and 3 of the women that I worked with at Carmel Bay Company were in their 80s. And one had a home here, she was fine. One had a rental property that her son paid for. But one lady who had been in our community for the last 30 years lives in a small room with a hot plate and a refrigerator in Pebble Beach in someone's extra room. I'm sure she would be delighted to live in a very small unit here in Carmel. And I think we have lots of people working downtown, minimum wage jobs, clerks and sales associates and so on, that would really like to live where they work. So we do have needs out there, and we have probably people that we see every day in our daily life downtown. They might serve us coffee, they might work in one of the restaurants that we go to, and I'm sure some of them would love to be able to live here. So I'm really excited that we will come up with some really creative ways of actually producing some of these units. It's not just a paper exercise unless we treat it that way. If we actually make some intent to incentivize, we may get some of these units, and we will have a good plan that would be accepted by HCD, and our community would still maintain control. That, for me, is the very most important part. If we would somehow lose our control to give permits or to have subjective considerations on things, I think that would be a detriment to Carmel.
Well put, council member. If I could be so bold, I would suggest maybe we let Ms. Waffle finish her presentation before we do much more interaction with the community, because we do have the time set aside at the end for the interaction. So unless there's something you want to get from them as we go along. But Marnie, do you have many slides left? How are we doing on the presentation? I know it's a doozy.
We're probably a little bit more than halfway there.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe we can move it along, but if we can get through our presentation, then we can get to the public comments, hopefully.
So one of the things that we wanted to accomplish tonight was discussing the housing feasibility study that was prepared by Echo Northwest. We made this publicly available earlier this month. And so we wanted to give you, a couple of weeks to look over the report, kind of digest the information, and then come prepared to give us some feedback. So we do have our consultant on Zoom, Chris Blakeney from Echo Northwest. He's going to present the next couple slides, which summarizes the housing feasibility study, what we looked at, what we were trying to get out of this study. And we are looking for some feedback. So once we complete the presentation during public comment, please feel free to give us your thoughts and ideas, ask us questions about this report, because we really need your feedback. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Marnie, and thank you all for having me today. This was a fun project for us to work on. My name is Chris Blakeney. I'm a project director with Echo Northwest. I'm based out of Los Angeles. Like our colleagues there with EMC, we do housing element, housing planning work throughout California and the West Coast, and so this was a very fun undertaking for us. And so I'm going to walk you through briefly. I know we're a little bit behind here, and we want to get to public comment. The project that Brandon and his staff reached out to us to undertake. And for us, it really all begins with trying to identify some of the structural market factors that are contributing to this issue of affordability in the community. And the first one that really stuck out to us is the share of structures in your commercial core that are not housing. And specifically, there are over 36 hotels that are located in the commercial core. And we don't mean this to be a knock on the tourism sector in Carmel. Tourism is certainly like one of the most important economic drivers. But when it comes to resource allocation, from a land consumption perspective, hotels take up a lot of land and they're not available for the residents that currently live there. We just had a discussion about the folks that work in Carmel, right? The people that are serving coffee or that are working in restaurants. None of them can afford to live in Carmel. Only, according to data from the Census Bureau, only 2.6% of the people that work in Carmel actually live in Carmel. Most of them live great distances. In some instances, of course, 25% or 26%, as we show on the slide. They commute from greater than 25 miles away, which, in addition to the housing burden that people have in California, this creates another cost to commute to their place of work. And now, Marty, if you can go to the next slide, please. And so affordability also shows up in just the kind of the real estate market data, right? So we looked at the median home price of a home, even just in the for sale market in Carmel, going back to 2014. And it was already high in 2014, but now it's even higher, and it's increased by a rate of 84% over that period, over just that 7 year period. Next slide, please, Marty. And so the project that we did in the context of affordability and this kind of city's mandate of the housing element to plan for housing, our project set out to take a real high level look at some strategies that the city could consider moving forward. And this was really intended to be a precursor to the housing element. It was referenced a couple times that the city is a little bit behind the timeline in getting this done, and it's correct. Like it's going to be a push for you folks to get this done by the end of the year. But this project had the foresight to try to get this early process of sites and identifying some potential strategies going early on. So you're not starting from zero here, I hope. And so what we did, the components of this study. We did a day-long site tour that was led by Brandon and his staff. We physically observed kind of the development profile of buildings in the downtown core, looked at some candidate sites, got a sense for effectively the utilization of buildings within the core. We did this high-level market analysis, looked at median home prices, rent trends, rates of cost burdening that was discussed earlier by Marty. And specifically the rate of second home ownership. We had our planning staff look at the existing zoning code, and this was a real high level review, but we looked for characteristics that might be a constraint on the opportunities that could allow delivering maximum densities that are allowed in your code. This is an important part of the housing element update process. One of the things that HCD is really looking for. It's removing constraints. So we like to say that it's not the city's responsibility to build housing. You're not responsible for building affordable housing or for building any housing. But what HCD is looking for is to ensure that you're not doing anything that is being the thing that's getting in the way. So you're not the constraint or you're not the barrier. So we took a look at that. And then we used some standard metrics to identify some sites that we think could have some redevelopment or development potential in your community. And then we put together a series of high-level initial recommendations for some policies or incentives that you could at least put on the table as a starting point in the conversation as you enter the housing element update process. Next slide, please, Mike. And so this analysis that we did that was really focused on sites, it was, we started with taking a look at what we could throw away right out of the gate, right? And so we started by throwing out any site that had historic resources. And so these are properties that have cultural and architectural value to your community. We didn't want to consider them as a redevelopment opportunity. We then deployed a series of really high-level metrics that are generally indicative of redevelopment potential in aggregate. They almost act like an index that could reveal some characteristics that lend itself to some sites that could have some consideration for inclusion. Now, I'd caveat this is a step higher than what EMC will be doing as part of the housing element update. HCD requires very specific criteria that requires a lot more resources than we had for this project to make the determination of what is and actually included in your site inventory. But this was kind of like an initial step to kind of refine that initial set to provide some more direction as you go into this process. So one of the things we looked at is value per square foot. So we take a look at the total combined land and improvement value, and we tier that and say, well, the lower value sites on a per square foot basis are generally more indicative than the high value sites, right? So if you have a nice building on a nice piece of land, less likely to redevelop. But if you have a lower value improvement on a lower value site, that could potentially have some opportunities. We also looked at sites with adjacent ownerships. So look for aggregation opportunities. So if there's a property owner that owns two, three, whatever sites in adjacency to each other to add more scale. This is particularly important for the affordable housing criteria. So HCD requires that you take a look at sites that have a minimum threshold of a half an acre to be included as allocated to a lower income obligation for your arena, unless you can prove that there are some development trends that justify otherwise, which, as we saw in some of the earlier slides, we have not had lower income or affordable housing development in Carmel over the last cycle, so that might be a hurdle moving forward. We also throw out sites that have really high value, not necessarily in terms of the real improvements, but in terms of the economic value. So this really got to the hotels, right? So even a C or low B level hotel in Carmel, even if the improvement doesn't have a really high real property value, it has a pretty high economic value because of the tourism industry. And we really threw out most of the hotels because we didn't think that they would be that the economic value of the existing use would be effectively an impediment to redevelopment of that property. We also considered sites that were identified in the last time you went through this process. So 8 years ago, you went through this process, you identified a range of sites. We went back and looked at that because there was an evaluation that went into identifying what those sites were, and we wanted to consider that. And then we had some discussions with some developers and property owners. We actually got on the phone and talked to some folks and got their insights into the market dynamics and their intentions for their properties, and that showed up in some of the sites that we identified. And then one of the last things we looked at was land to improvement ratio, and this is a pretty classical metric if you're looking at redevelopment opportunities at a really, really high level. And the theory behind it is if your improvement value is relatively low compared to the value of the land, so you have a really nice prime piece of dirt, but it might have a gas station or a small shack or something on it, then that's generally indicative of an opportunity that you should look into a little more closely. And then again, like I said, we did a site visit and spot check some of these things to determine if there were some underutilization opportunities, large areas of land that were undeveloped, kind of lot coverage type of things. Maybe prime properties that might have some amenities nearby that would be indicative of some increased values and things of that nature. And so taken together, we put all this and we came together. Luckily, you have a relatively small commercial core. And so we were able to spot check some of that and come up with some recommendations of some sites that we think would serve as a valuable baseline as you move into your housing element update process. And there were 17 sites in total, range from vacant sites that are owned by the city that are kind of vacated right away, opportunities for densification. This was something that showed up in the community comments that Marnie referenced, where there was some community feedback to really look at opportunities to add a story or add a unit on top or convert a second story office into a residential use. Underutilized parking lots, sites that are on the periphery of the existing commercial core. Sunset Center is a great example that could be leveraged for housing in conjunction with some additional parking to to potentially create some opportunities for housing development. And so, and I think Marty's going to go into a little bit more detail about some of these sites, and we're happy to take questions, but that effectively wraps up my kind of presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So again, as Chris mentioned, this was a very kind of high-level first pass. We wanted to get a sense for what might be available. We were very intentional in just looking at the commercial area and what opportunities might exist there. But as we go into our update process, we're going to be looking at other opportunities as well, accessory dwelling units being one of them in our residential districts. So just kind of briefly, I'm sure most of you are going to be familiar with many of these sites. A lot of the sites identified as part of this initial effort are parking lots, which are often considered underutilized sites. Certainly parking is very important in Carmel, and our intention is not to replace the parking with just housing, but how can we add housing to the areas where we currently have parking? So that was kind of the thought there. Again, as Chris mentioned, we have a number of sites that are unimproved, right-of-way. Could those possibly be used to construct additional housing? We looked at downtown and some of our one-story buildings that are flanked by two-story buildings. Is that an opportunity to put a second floor with some additional residential units? And then this really interesting site that has a parking lot and 3 garages. Could this property be better utilized? If the property owner was interested in redeveloping, this could be a site for housing. And then again, I think you see a lot of pavement in these pictures. There's a lot of asphalt, there's a lot of parking. And again, this was just the first pass. So we identified these 17 sites as potential. We have reached out to the property owners and invited them to engage with us in this process to see what level of interest they might have in redeveloping their sites or adding housing to the village. And as we go into our housing element update, we're going to be looking at sites in a greater level of detail, and we'll be coming back to the community for additional conversations about those sites as well.
Marnie, can I just put a little note into that, what we just went through? So it's important to recognize that those target sites that Marnie just went through, none of those are, planned development, none of them are guaranteed development. The city's not planning on, taking over any properties. Again, we're in the process right now of creating a plan, and the plan is required by the state to have these target sites where if a private developer came in and wanted to redevelop a site, which sites are the most likely to be redeveloped based on those criteria that Mr. Blackney went through, and which ones could yield actual housing units. So again, none of those are guaranteed development projects. That's just part of the plan that we have to create that the state ultimately approves.
Yeah, and if I can, Brendan, I would just add on top of that, that this is a process you'll be going through over the next year where this will be refined. And if there is, ownership is a part of this. And if there's an owner that says, well, this is very high value use for me, please do not include this site in the housing inventory. That's part of the process. And so yeah, these are just kind of the initial run based on a series of kind of defined metrics and characteristics that are typically indicative of opportunities to get that conversation started as you go into the housing element update process.
I was just going to add, in no way would we be able to tell these property owners that they have to do something. That's not it at all. Mm-hmm. We're just saying, hey, Mr. Peterson, if you have this building on 7th and Dolores, you could do something with it. That's all we're saying. We would never demand that they're doing that. So anybody that has their picture on one of these, don't get freaked out.
And I would like to say, we did a little reconnaissance field trip walking around downtown, and I urge all of you to do that when you're downtown. just walk around and look at some of the buildings that are just one story that getting a little older, maybe could use some refurbishment and could take a second story. We're going to have a very exciting project starting on Dolores, hopefully soon. The old stone building there between 7th and Ocean on the east side is going to get 3 units upstairs, and the way it's designed, we probably won't even see them. But it's going to be very exciting to start to see a little creativity come about for more housing downtown, where right now there's just maybe an old flat building. Now, that said, some buildings may not be able to take a brand new upstairs without, some definite infrastructure. And even in our design traditions, there's a page showing what some downtown buildings might look like, changed into maybe 2-story structures, but setbacks on the upstairs. So yeah, take a walk around town and start to look at where you think you might be able to do something creative.
All right, Marnie. You got what, one or two slides left?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
awesome.
a couple more.
Fantastic.
So constraints. So another thing that this report that Echo Northwest prepared for us looked at was what are the constraints, the development of housing. We all know water. Water is a huge constraint. Also, the market conditions, high land value doesn't lend itself to redevelopment. Also, we have a pattern of small lot sizes. Most of you may know in the residential area, they're typically 4,000 square feet. In the commercial area, they can be even smaller than that. And that's where the adjacent ownership comes into play. Assembling parcels to a reasonable size for redevelopment requires that it be under a single ownership. And that can be difficult to do. So we looked at where those opportunities already exist. And again, we will reach out to those owners and see what their level of interest is in developing new housing. Another constraint is the city's review process. It can be lengthy and cumbersome, and so we'll be looking at that as well. How do we improve the review process? How do we expedite the review of projects without sacrificing the local design and development standards that contribute to the character that is Carmel. So specifically, some of the things that we started to look at and that we will be looking at in more depth as we move forward is our density bonus. We currently have a density bonus that allows for 44 dwelling units per acre if affordable units are included. Developers have not been taking advantage of this density bonus, and so we want to find out why this hasn't been something that they have taken advantage of, and what needs to change in order for it to be more successful, or maybe it's just not an option for our community. Other development standards that could hinder the construction of new housing could be our 2-story limit in the commercial district. Also, we limit the maximum building coverage, so how large the footprint of the building is on the lot. And sometimes this has to do with, again, our character, encouraging courtyards, encouraging interblock walkways. These are amenities that are very valuable in our community, but it requires that the building footprint be a little bit smaller to accommodate them. So how do we navigate those two things? Also, our floor area ratio, which is how big of a square footage of a building can be. Some may say this is on the lower end of the percentage. We might need to look at increasing that, but what would be the impacts of additional mass kind of in our downtown area? So we need to look at these things and figure out how we encourage the development of housing without sacrificing our character. Also, parking is often a constraint because it requires additional space. So we'll be reevaluating our parking standards to see if maybe reducing them might be an incentive for the development of housing. So on the incentive side, looking for public-private partnerships, land leases. The city has done this successfully with the Carmel Foundation. Are there potentially other opportunities that may exist in that realm? Targeted rezoning of specific sites, amendments, again, to our development standards, removing some of those constraints, and maybe providing some more bonuses that would entice a developer to build more housing, reducing the parking requirements, and then fee reductions or waivers. So these are just some very kind of basic common incentives that you would find in a variety of communities, and we're just looking for more creativity. We're looking to hear from the development community on what it would take to build new housing and how we can partner with them to create a plan that will facilitate that to happen. So we are coming up on the end here. We want to know from you, what are your thoughts on the housing feasibility study? What are your thoughts on the 17 sites that we've identified? We want to hear your response, your feedback. What are your thoughts on constraints? What are your thoughts on 2 stories? What are your thoughts on parking? And what are some potential incentives to encourage new housing? So I'm going to wrap it up here. This is all of our contact information. We will have this presentation posted on our website. And then other ways that you can stay informed. We do have a sign-in sheet here, so if you'd like us to continue to keep you updated as we go throughout this process, please be sure to leave your information. You can also sign up on our website for the housing email listserv. We will be publishing future meetings in the Friday Letter as well as the Pine Cone, so keep an eye out for those. And then again, our website is a resource for you. And as soon as we get our dedicated webpage up, we will put a link on our website redirecting you to that. And with that, I'm going to end it.
Brandon? Okay, great. So I think we're going to open it up to public questions.
Yeah, I would say, if the ad hoc committee has any questions of staff, or if you want to see if the other city council members want to have questions of staff before we open for public comment, that might be something to do.
Well, Alessandra, Jeff?
Thank you. First, before I ask my one question, thank you, Bobby and Karen, for all the work, all the tremendous amount of work that you've done, and Marnie and Brandon and Catherine and staff too. Great effort. Very, very, very appreciative. I have a question for Marnie and Chris. You talked about the economic disincentives for developing downtown, and Chris, you're here, right? I got the name right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You talked about the economic value of existing use of hotels would be an economic disincentive for redevelopment. And I assume that means that the amount of revenue that the hotels bring on based on the license that they have to operate a hotel room?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, if you took a look at the real property, if you're using a classical metric like we did in a lot of this analysis, was looking at the real property value of the improvement relative to the land. Those are kind of classic real estate redevelopment kind of rule of thumb, high level metrics, right? But what they don't take into consideration is the impediment that an existing use might have. And one of those impediments is that existing use has a high economic value. And in Carmel, due to the tourism industry, a property that might be a moderate level hotel has a pretty high economic value relative to the value of the improvement. And so that's what we're getting at, is that because it has a very productive economic use, even if the real property might have some diminished value or it might be seasoned. The economic value of the actual use prohibits redevelopment opportunities.
So in your example of a moderate level hotel having an economic value, if we allowed the moderate level hotel to sell its use permit for that hotel room to above moderate level hotel, would that provide an incentive for that moderate level hotel to convert some of their property to housing?
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question that gets into the secondary market for the value of that permit, right? And I don't have the background and information and analysis to go into that. But theoretically, if I understand your question, if there was a market to transfer that use permit and the existing use could get enough value out of that to justify the loss in future income associated with operating that business, theoretically there could be something there. But like, again, that's a really detailed level of analysis that we have not even touched.
Thank you.
That was a great question, Jeff. That was a really great question. Thanks. Alessandra, I think you're out there. I don't think Dave is, but Alessandra, if you're out there, do you have anything?
Hi. Thanks, Bobby. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to add that I just feel that everything should be on the table. I know this report is restrictive and it's narrowed down the areas that we're looking at, but I really think we need to look at hotels. I think we need to look at the Junipero Serra School, and I think we also need to look at the third floor of the Carmel Plaza and really just put everything on the table and not limit ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Alessandra. So again, now, Karen, did you want to add anything?
No, I just wondered if you could maybe, Andy, give us a real quick idea of some of the things that some of those other cities have come up with that you found very creative. I know we'll be doing that throughout this process, but you might think of a few right now that would be enticing to our crowd.
Well, I have to say what I just heard about the idea of possible transfer of development rights, that's very exciting, and it's local. So it's directly in relationship to your understanding of an incentive that could work here. One little used tool that I like to look to is SB 10, and that allows for up to 10 units to be developed on any site that's zoned residential. It doesn't mean that it would be 10 units because I know we have very small sites here, but that's an opportunity. It's an optional state law, and it came out at the same time as SB 9. So I think a lot of people ignored it, or they were so afraid of SB 9 that once they heard that it was optional, they thought, well, then I don't need to learn it. But I think it's a powerful tool, and it's an opportunity to enable a little bit of density, maybe like for those street ends, for instance. And I guess I will throw out my idea that I'm especially excited by. If a street end is, because it's owned by the city, that means you maintain a lot of control around it. So there could be an opportunity to have, say, through SB 10, you get to decide that criteria. And so maybe as part of that criteria, you have a design competition. It could be statewide. You could bring in some really interesting designs, and there could be some, in the end, it would be the character that you select, because you could have those designs before you and determine what would be a positive contribution to the character and charm of Carmel-by-the-Sea.
Andy, I'm gonna ask you a question that probably perked up a lot of ears out there. Did you just say that SB 10 would allow somebody to build 10 units on one residential site?
Like I said, up to 10. So the sites that we looked at in Belvedere.
Right? Am I right? Did you guys want to know that question?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna save Andy. I'm gonna jump in and save Andy's life right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if you remember about a year ago when I actually came to City Council and presented on SB 8, 9, and 10, this is when SB 9 came out. And I said, don't worry about SB 9. It's not something we have to be scared about, which ended up being true because statewide, only like 50-some applications have actually been processed and approved. But SB 10 is an optional, I want to make that word very clear, optional thing that the city would have to adopt an ordinance. So what Andy's saying is that this is one of those tools that are out there. It doesn't have to be 10. We could adopt an ordinance, say, for our city parcels, we want to allow up to 5 or whatever. But we don't have to do that. It's totally optional. The nice thing about it, one of the things that makes it desirable is that you don't have to do a lot of the environmental analysis because it's your own property and you can upzone that way. But it's not something we have to do. It's totally optional. Not necessarily a recommendation of staff, but it's something that does exist in the ether as an option. So you guys asked for creative options, and he just gave you one.
Okay, thanks.
I do have a question.
Another thing.
Oops, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say another thing about SB 10 is it's focused on transit-rich areas, and I'm not quite certain. Brandon, we talked about this very early on in our study of whether or not Carmel would qualify for SB 10 because of the transit-rich criteria. And Andy, you might have some insight into that.
Right. It has to be a high level transit stop, which we actually don't even have in the city. So there's a lot of things. Yeah. Okay. I think we should kind of set that one to the side and get to the public comments.
Let's move over.
Not about SB 10 though, please.
Okay, I have a question. Do we have a list of or an inventory of how many duplexes already exist in Carmel?
I'm going to say no. The state does publish a report that breaks down our housing units by type. But if you were to ask me where the duplexes are, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I do know of 2 that have been converted to single-family homes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say, Marnie, our analysis that just pulled the data from the U.S. Census Bureau, the most recent estimates, zero duplexes. There are some triplexes and quadplexes, but the data shows 0 duplexes.
That's wrong.
I was going to say, we know right across the street is a duplex, and there are more duplexes in town.
Yeah, the ACS data is survey-based, so there's some margins of error, but yeah, it's relative to the overall size of housing units, it's relatively low.
If it's something that we need to figure out through this process, we can find out.
I think it's time we get it out to the public.
I agree.
I just want to ask everybody to come up and ask your question, but please remember, this isn't the time to say that you don't want to do this or you want to sue the state or fight the state. This isn't the forum for that.
Good evening. Nancy Toomey here, resident and Carmel concerned citizen, who is very concerned about the plethora or consumed, not concerned, consumed in the plethora of online content and material on this topic. So it's a big learning curve for a lot of us who haven't been consumed in this for some time. But this obviously is no longer just a planning exercise or something that we can put on the shelf. That's got a lot of muscle to it that we have to really, go through the process and make this all happen around our RENA numbers and the whole housing element initiative. Everyone does need to understand, as Marnie had covered, that there are penalties that if we don't move ahead and get this thing done over the course of the year. So, here we go, off and running. We do thank you for your efforts, everybody, city staff, council members, etc. And we look forward to the hard work, and I'll use my magic that's going to need to happen to get us in between here and the end of the year. But stepping back, obviously, we are blessed and privileged in so many ways in this village. We have amazing homes as residents. We share this space with our businesses and their employees and their great organizations that we've got, and the visitors as well. They all take advantage of what we bring to the table. We know that the benefits of being of Carmel-by-the-Sea Carmel-by-the-Sea comes from its people, the nature, how we've been carefully built out over all of these decades. Our architecture, residential and commercial, has been carefully guided over the decades and delivering much of the charm and the character of what is our village. The architecture definitely attracts visitors, existing and future residents and businesses to our city, and all of that provides a tax base that gives us services and benefits to those of us that live here and visit. If we dramatically alter the look and feel of our village with the housing element changes and requirements, we risk losing the economic benefit that we've all grown accustomed. Please know that we should and hopefully do welcome everyone from all races, religions, background, economic, and otherwise. So it's not all about trying to restrict the people that come here and or live here in any way. We especially welcome everyone who is motivated and engaged in preserving and protecting and participating in what makes this village so wonderful and what we all hold dear. Separately, I would like to call out that I doubt that anyone objects to the macro housing element goals of affordable places to live and minimize long commutes. Great goals, no question, thumbs up on that. Again, as we know, everything that attracts all of us to this village, with everything that attracts us to this village, the cost of housing has escalated dramatically, as shown in the slides that we've seen already, making these changes ahead of us very significant. I would call out in some of the examples that were provided in the report by Eco Northwest. I'd still like to see emphasized and explored the Larson Field, which was called out, the buildings that are commercial buildings near 7th and Dolores, or commercial-ish, and the post office wasn't in the mix that I was aware of. Okay, let me wrap it up. With our housing element changes, we appear to be in a state of full employment for city planners, yay, present company, their staff, builders, of course, and lawyers representing both sides of the cities, like ours and developers. And we know that Carmel has no limit, has no or limited open land.
Nancy, I got to get you to wrap it up.
Yeah. Questionable access to water, as you called out, repurposing of existing land options hasn't is a real issue.
All right. Well, thank you, Nancy.
I just encourage us to go ahead and consider moving this forward, but in parallel running against some of the actions that are legal and otherwise that are in place and available throughout the state.
Nancy, I got to get you to wrap it up because there's going to be other people that want to speak, and what we're really looking for is ideas.
I got
we understand.
And
we understand.
In parallel, we should explore the resolutions and the ballot measures as we continue through this creative process that you're pulling on and ahead of us.
Thank you, Nancy.
Hi, I'm Dylan Witt. I'll try to be quick. I just kind of mainly want to reiterate, I feel like the design review that came out, I appreciate all the work, but I'm very concerned that we're not focused on keeping some of the character. There was a lot of talk about zoning. There was talk about removing changing it to objective criteria of our design reviews. And I think those kind of major changes can change the character of a town. We've spent a long time and effort making design process so that we keep the character of this community. I don't want us to change major zoning. Like the idea of putting a 10-plex, I don't mean to, but you have to understand I'm a homeowner. I almost just had a heart attack. I don't want a 10-plex sitting next to me in my community. I went through great effort, 5 years of the design process to try to fit into this community, and I love this community, but that's going to ruin the community. And so I love all the ideas of repurposing areas. I just think we need to keep the design characters. If we can fit these in, and I think it'd be a wonderful thing, but we need to keep our design character. I don't want to see 3- and 4-story buildings go up. I don't want to see houses turn into 4-plexes. I just think that's going to ruin the wonderful, quaint character that we have. And there's a lot of places that we have, as I said, the school was mentioned, a lot of these vacant lots. I think these are all good ideas, but we need to keep the design in the forefront. I do have one quick question. When we talked about the substantial compliance definition, from what I understand, if you're not in substantial compliance, that's when you can have the builder's remedy come in place. And what I read is the HCD doesn't actually define that. The city or county can actually define that.
Brandon?
But if the HCD then deems that is not compliant, they can go to the Attorney General and appeal the process. So I'm a little confused at how this all gets approved. If I just read the basic thing and it said that they can't say you're out of compliance and put you into that unless they appeal it to the Attorney General. Am I missing? Yeah,
we'll look into that a little bit more. I don't want to get into legalities of it, but when we're setting up our website for the housing element, so we're gonna have an FAQ page on there, and I think that the Builder's Remedy is gonna be a great place for a lot of FAQ stuff. So we'll take a note of your question, make sure it gets answered on there.
So like a lot of these things, I think we need to look at it in more detail. The thing I want to stress is we should keep our design characters, our subjective design.
This isn't like a typical council meeting, so I feel we can talk back. And Karen may want to add, but I can certainly add. I think everybody feels that way. I think that is just, everybody feels that way. What we're trying to do here is, you walk through the neighborhood. I walked with your wife and showed her my ideas.
Right.
I'm hoping that the citizens of this town and community will also have some ideas instead of just a hard stop. Like, what else is out there?
I think these are the ideas that you brought, as long as we do these ideas with design, and I think we have enough spots. Now, the other question, I guess, is with the ADUs, how many of the ADUs can we include in this? You gave a calculation about, a certain percentage of ADUs can be considered.
So there isn't a limit. So there hasn't been, from my knowledge, and Andy can nod or disagree, but there isn't a defined limit of how many ADUs can count towards your plan. You submit the plan to the state and they review it and they tell you basically whether it holds water or not.
So I think those should be included as a part of what we're doing.
We do intend them to be part of the
decreases
solution.
demand on the downtown area, because I feel like this is going to be this time, 8 years from now, they're going to probably ask for more. There's only so much space, and I really don't want to see this place get to build up to be, 3-4 story buildings everywhere, and multiplexes and big, because it will kind of ruin this quaint community.
Of course. I think we all understand and agree and believe that.
Okay.
But I think that it's also giving us, we have this, like as Andy said, the power is now. The power is now to direct this. And moving forward, I think a lot of cities are going to combat the state and these mandates.
Okay.
But for right now, we got to do what we got to do.
Okay.
And I want to tell you, I think all of us want to maintain control and have our subjective design reviews. That's what we're trying to ensure, that we are able to keep that by coming up with a valid plan that can be approved by HCD, so that we don't lose that control. And as far as rezoning, that might be something that we have to give more education about, because let's just say we wanted to build more parking at Sunset Center with housing on top. Well, right now that zoning for there is cultural and something else. That might have to be rezoned to accommodate both parking and housing. So,
yeah, and when I said rezoning, I do understand there has to be
Yeah.
some. I'm just saying it has to be, well, I'm sure you would do this,
Yeah.
but thought out on a very specific basis. And as I said, I think keeping the character, and I know that sounds like a simple thing to do. It seems, do I have an idea with these sites that we have? Do we have any idea what number we're looking at, what we have the capability of, or are we still? Because you say we need creative ideas. We have the ADUs and we have these sites, but I don't know what other ideas, what other things that we could consider. I guess I'm.
Well, like one of the things that we need to get to, I think, other people, but give me a call. We'll chat about it.
Hello, everyone. Did you know only 30 of the 109 Bay Area cities and counties submitted to the state their housing element plans?
Remember what this meeting's about.
Remember, I'm speaking, thank you. And of those 30, only 4 of them were approved by HCD. It's very difficult to get their approval. And why do you think so many people are not even submitting them, though? Well, let's look at the blueprints for the housing element. Echo Bible here. First of all, the last RENA cycle demanded we produce 31 units and we failed. Now, with a greater than 1,000% increase, our village is being targeted to fail again, which we should all support that. This council is proposing that we do away with height, density, and zoning restrictions. They're looking to fill in courtyards and snatch up green belts in the right-of-way throughout the village. Never mind that we don't have the resources to accommodate the massive growth proposal, because we can just change all the zoning and building restrictions to make Sacramento happy. Yay. This housing element proposal is filled with charts and misguided statistics and rule-breaking scenarios. Does it matter how many second homes lie within the city limits? Are multi-million-dollar homes going to be rented to low-income workers? Do low-income workers even really want to live here? What about the commute patterns that don't tell a full story? What if a husband lives and works 25 plus miles away from here, but his wife commutes to Carmel? If they move here, now the wife lives and works here, and her husband must now commute. You know? And finally, the data table of candidate sites looks more like a wartime hostile takeover of the village. There's a strong argument for the reason so many California communities are not complying with the draconian efforts of the HCD and RENA, because the allocation numbers are preposterous and are flat out designed to destroy communities all over the entire state, and all for the purpose of equity and equality. Let's consider instead the dozens of reasons that Carmel-by-the-Sea is positioned as one of the most affluent and most beautiful communities across the entire nation, which I believe we should proudly fight the state of California to stay atop of that list. So I think the only real question for the council tonight is, who are you fighting for? Because it's clearly not the residents of Carmel-by-the-Sea.
Thank you, Parker.
You're welcome.
Hi, Richard Kreitman.
Hi, Richard.
My notes here. So one additional site that wasn't mentioned is the old AT&T, well, they're still using part of it, the AT&T building.
Yes, it was mentioned.
It was mentioned?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it when I read the list. Yeah, that's almost half an acre. And from what I understand, it used to be filled with equipment, and now what they need fits in a closet, so.
That's what we've heard.
So again, I don't think we should be apologetic about not having affordable housing for all those people who work here. The people who work in the apartments and offices on Park Avenue, Manhattan, don't live there. And given our property values, we're Park Avenue and Boardwalk. Many of us who live here, if not most, couldn't afford to buy our houses now. And so if people pay a large percent of their income, or too great a percent of their income to live here, one way to say bluntly is they can't afford to live here. And that's like those who plead that they couldn't afford their dream of a home in Carmel without renting it out short-term or sharing it with 6 other families. They can't afford it. But we can give it a try, and we should. And one way would be if we permitted a ratio between short-term rentals and affordable units that would be able to attract commercial developers to build. If we restricted these short-term units in a complex, so say a 3-night minimum, that wouldn't be competing much with our innkeepers who have I believe it was a 1.3 night average stay in Carmel. When I checked a few years ago, maybe it's 1.7 now. And these people would pay TOT, and a 2 and 3 bedroom short-term apartment in Carmel, it makes it possible for families to come and stay longer, and those can command $1,000 a night or more. So think of how many $1,200 a month low-income units would be financed by allowing one short-term rental, short-term rental unit that could, as I say, during the big months of the, let's say, Car Week and AT&T, they can bring in $20,000 a month. And what might this look like? Well, we already have some of this, and it's not bad. Consider those sets of condos at between 3rd, 4th, Mission, San Carlos, on the other side of Unipro, I believe on 4th, 5th or 6th. They're, the multi-unit, they fit in. They're not bad. And if 1 or 2 of the units were short-term rentals, I think the arithmetic is that the rest could be lower income or middle income because of how much a short-term rental is worth to us in Carmel. And, well, regarding the ADUs, we have 2 grandfathered units at our house, which aren't noted or registered. And it's a little cynical, but if we registered them and it didn't affect our ability as a homeowner at all, we get 2 more units towards our account. And there must be, as has been mentioned, there could be hundreds of these legal secondary units here that we rent them out once a year for.
So let me get this straight, Richard. You're saying that your solution, or one of the possible solutions, is to allow for less than 30-day rentals, and in return, we would give that property owner, they would have to have a affordable unit component to their building.
Yeah, and it's a ratio, and I believe, given the arithmetic, and talk to a developer, and this would be if they did the AT&T building, or they took over, it would be a large development, the Sunset North lot, over a parking.
All right, well, I think your time is good, so thanks for this
but
idea.
I think it's multiple low-income units could be financed by one good size, a 3-2 apartment. Yeah.
Thanks, Richard.
Good evening, Alison Schelling, local Carmel-by-the-Sea resident. I think this is a fabulous opportunity, and I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that we can think about the genius of the and. The genius of the and. We can actually take care of some of these elements that we need to do, build some more housing for people who would do very well living here rather than driving. I've lived in very high net worth towns on the peninsula, and it is absolutely impossible today for the people I know who still live there to find employees who aren't driving in for 80 miles. So I know we will be able to come up with wonderful, wonderful solutions, and I think some of the properties called out, the parking lot for the Sunset Center would be a fantastic place to have parking and affordable housing above it. So I look forward to this year, and I'm just delighted. So let's go for it, and let's make it happen.
Thank you. We do have a couple people on.
Okay, thanks.
Frankie Laney, a Carmel resident. Just a quick question. This wonderful analysis you've done of the commercial district, are you going to do a similar one for the residential district? And I also take this opportunity to advocate in behalf of continuing Carmel's traditional architectural diversity. And I'll take my answer down.
Thank you. Brandon? Yeah.
Sure. That's a great question. A lot of the analysis of the residential district is going to get fleshed out in the work we're going to do with EMC. So Echo Northwest really focused on the economics of the downtown commercial district, because there's more nuance to the economics with all the different business types and hotels and all that. So we will do a similar type of analysis, where does it make sense to develop in the residential districts. But this was really the jumping off point for the housing element update that we're going to do with EMC.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon. Please.
Hi, my name is Young San. I'm just a resident of Carmel here. And thank you for the presentation. The presentation was very clear. And I know this is just a proactive, we're just trying to work at it. And I think we could come up with an ideal. And like what you said, Karen, my house, I have a guest house, and I did get a permit to turn it into ADU. I just need to get an inspection for final. I think we could work at it, but I do have a question regards to certification by December 15. What kind of process or the procedure has to be in there to get a certification so you don't get citation for it, even though we don't have to pursue everything in 8 years? So that's my question.
Thank you for that question.
Marnie, you want to answer it? Andy? Who?
Sure, I'll summarize. So the three major things we need to make sure we have are our sites and our policies, programs, goals. And the third thing is that we are adequately addressing the affirmatively furthering fair housing, the new law. So with those three things in place in our draft, along with a lot of other details, but if I were to summarize, I would say those are the three major things we need to make sure we address, and we'll be working with HCD along the way. So I'm confident with this team and this community that we'll get there.
Yeah, and I can add to that just a little bit if I could, Councilmember. I'm sorry. So there will be more of these types. So the process, there's going to include more public meetings. One of the things that was really encouraging as we started out on this process is the staff at HCD is willing to and has offered to work with us iteratively as we go through the process. So last RENA cycle, you basically had certain points in the process where you had to turn in your homework and just wait for a response. Now they're going to work with us on different components of the plan. So we know that we're not going to get to the end or those check-in points and have a big blind side or something like that. So I do feel like the process is going to be pretty smooth. It's going to be fast, but we're going to make sure that the public is involved a lot.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, Brian, come on up. And then we have 2 people out in Zoom, and we're running short on time. So okay.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Councilmember Richards. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. It's interesting, this weekend I saw a report that was issued through CNBC talking about the top 10 markets in the U.S. for second homes bought by millionaires. Guess what? Carmel made the list. And this whole time I've been sitting in here and I keep reading behind your head about how we're primarily, essentially, and predominantly a residential city. And I believe that, and I want to see us preserve the residential character. Unfortunately, I'm not a resident. I can't afford it. Woe is me. Guess what? I don't live here, but I come here almost every day. I love it. I want to see it preserve its residential character. I've heard some interesting things tonight. I would encourage you to look at more increased density for housing in the commercial district. As you well know, I've worked for businesses here. We have people that commute from afar, and of course they do go and park in the neighborhoods. That's a whole nother ball of wax. We can talk about it another time. I'm very intrigued by Councilmember Barron's comment about the hotel units and how there could be some kind of transferable development rights. I would encourage you to pursue that. The question I have, and it's really more for Brandon and Marnie and others, is I know we must get this certified housing element. If we fail to do so, it seems like it's incredibly punitive if we do not. What I'm really concerned about, not so much the fines, which are draconian, is this lack of the control by your office to issue permits that would be given over to Sacramento. And I can't imagine that Sacramento's got the staff or power, so they're going to farm it out to a developer. And if you think you're going to keep your residential character when an out-of-city residential developer is going to come in taking advantage of the panoply of new laws like SB 8, SB 9, SB 10, then we're really in trouble. So thank you. And I'd encourage some feedback from Marnie or Brandon about what those, like losing the suspension of local land use and the permit moratorium.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, Tasha Witt, full-time resident. Marnie, would you pull up at some point the commute map? I had some questions. Agree that we have to turn in those numbers or we're going to have bad consequences. So we have to. And also, I noticed with the builder's remedy, if we don't, then we lose our discretionary zoning standards with those 5 reasons for denial. So that's another important reason. And this ad hoc committee's mission statement is preserving the character of Carmel-by-the-Sea. The EMC planning group advocates we maintain local control, but the Eco Northwest housing element suggested we made the recommendation of objective zoning standards only to accommodate the housing. And so that's what I think a lot of people are reacting to. And I'm glad to hear that the council would like to also preserve our character. I'm not going to go through all of that because I think you know how strongly we feel. I could say a lot about that. I also think that people that have built houses here have been through a rigorous design process, and we'd want equal application of the design standards to additional housing units. It's undeniable that it's an economic asset to our community, our character. And if we lose that character, there's people who may not want to visit the hotels, and we won't have workers to work in the hotels. So I think it's really important to our economics. I wanted to talk about the solutions. A lot of the solutions were missing from the Eco Northwest report. You said that we want everything on the table. You said we need to be creative. And so I have some solutions, and I think that they should be the least intrusive options to start with. Retrofitting already built hotels would be the least intrusive because it wouldn't change the character of Carmel. They already have water rights, and they could just have suites and kitchenettes. Also, the 2-star hotels were left off this report. The value was talked about as not something to do with taxes, but I think if we're being creative, we could get a lot of RENA numbers and that would not be in an intrusive way as well. The abandoned Junipero Serra School, that's a great opportunity because, you know, what if you have a family of 4 and maybe there's young children and they want a playground? It's also located where you can walk to the grocery store, and there could be an option to maybe even take a bus to town or ride your bike or walk to town. So that would be a great way to get a lot of RENA numbers. I feel the same about, should I breathe for a second? The Mission Playing Fields. It does need to be mitigated because of the floodplain, but there's a lot of homes also in the floodplain, but that could be mitigated. And that is similar to the Junipero Serra School as far as getting a lot of our RENA numbers. I am definitely opposed to the SB9 dividing our ones into 10 units.
So Tasha, we're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay, last thing about this commute map. So this map is showing 74% of our commuters are within 25 miles, and the 26% are off this map, and I'd be curious to know where they're commuting from. But 75%, I mean, I just looked at the miles, and it's like PG's 4.5 miles, Monterey's 3.3, Seaside 6.8, Carmel Valley 7.6 miles, Marina's 11, and Salinas is 17. It does not seem like a bad commute to, and they're living great coastal, you know, along the coast, and it doesn't seem like a bad commute. So I just wanted to point that out.
Tosh, thanks for bringing up some suggestions, and we can talk more about it.
Okay, we have 2 people.
Yeah, and then we got to go to Zoom after this.
Hi, Tim Toomey here, resident. I only get 3 minutes.
Yeah.
No, I'll be really quick. I just want to reiterate some of the stuff that Tasha was saying, and also Richard Kreitman and Jeff Barron, that we've got to do this. You know, obviously we got to get over that little piece there. But I think that, you know, it's really important to you know, create a situation where we don't have to require significant changes, you know, in our current zoning. And to do that, a lot of discussions tonight around, you know, redeveloping existing areas, I think, is really the key. As Alexandra pointed out, nobody, you know, the motels are not on that list. And I read somewhere where a 2-star hotel, and I actually talked to a hoteler, that 2-star hotel in Carmel is really valuable because, you know, even though it's only 2-star, it's a location, you know, et cetera. But there's got to be, you know, areas, hotels, motels, you know, buildings like that that are existing, that are, you know, in need of repair, that, you know, a developer could see this as an opportunity. And for us, it would be, because it would, you know, we could develop it so it fits in. We're not, you know, spending a lot of money recreating things. And the Mission Basilica School, yeah, is another one. Let's see here. So that's it for tonight. But I do have a lot to say when the time comes to talk about pushback. Mm-hmm. And you know, we've been doing a lot of reading, and you know, a lot of cities are ahead of this on this. Some are, you know, haven't quite got to the point, you know, through their litigation, and there's, you know, resolutions that they've passed, you know, maybe symbolic and such, but, you know, I'll save those for a later time. Question, though, I have for Marnie and Brandon is, when we develop our plan, is it incumbent upon us to make sure that the plan is permitted, not necessarily built, but do we have an obligation to shepherd it through the permitting process?
What part of the permitting? I'm not.
Well, so we have 349 units. Okay.
We don't have to build.
We don't have to build them, but we have to permit them?
Well, they have to fall under our rules.
Yes, I think I understand the question.
Yeah, I mean,
so, like,
right.
let's say that one of the target sites that we put up there, a developer comes in, we've adopted our plan, HCD says, great job, this is your plan. We have someone that comes in and proposes a project. I think you're asking, are we beholden or required to approve a project on that site?
Exactly.
The answer is no.
Okay.
We still have to go through the normal development process, all of our design review, planning, zoning law, all that stuff.
Okay, because I saw something, and you know, maybe you know more about this than I do, where I think it was Saratoga. They didn't complete their permitting requirements, and then the builder's remedy thing, you know, went into play. So just kind of a, you know, technical question. You get, you know, if that changes, you know, let us know. But thank you.
Thanks.
Now, that's not to say we might not come up with incentives perhaps, reduced fees through the process, or, New York, when they wanted to get people back down into the area where the World Trade Center went down, they gave a 25-year tax abatement. I don't know whether we can do anything about taxes, but you can create incentives that, Tim, we really have three other people that want to talk.
Right, but also can somebody prioritize the 17 list as we go through that?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go out to Zoom. Gabriel Sanders? Still out there?
I sure am. Yeah. Thank you. First of all, this is Gabe Sanders. I am the Deputy Director of Monterey County Land Watch, and you probably heard me in some of these meetings before. First, I just want to commend both the residents of Carmel-by-the-Sea and the staff for all of the creative thinking that I've been hearing so far in terms of finding ways to make the arena allocation work, because that's what it's going to take, not just for Carmel, but for all of the jurisdictions in Monterey County. It's taking creative thinking for a lot of the jurisdictions across California to make this work.
Excuse me just a minute, Gabriel. I'm really having trouble understanding you. Maybe you could speak closer to your phone.
So, okay. Can you hear me a little better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm standing outside in the rain, but one more time, I just want to say I commend the creative thinking that I've been hearing from both residents and the city staff, because that's what it's going to take to make this work. I saw some of the constraints listed in the analysis that was done by the contractor, not EMC Plan, but the other one I don't remember offhand. I think it was Econ something or other there. And the constraint about the height limits, of course, is one that is a touchy one. The height limit, which is currently imposed by Carmel's downtown area, is one that will make it very difficult to utilize the existing commercial area for additional housing. But I would really encourage, as somebody who is fairly familiar with design standards and what it would take to accommodate additional density, but to really evaluate where height limits can be lifted to accommodate additional residential use in the commercial area, because that's where people work. That's where people wouldn't need a car to go to work. If they're worried about vehicle traffic, the way to minimize it is by getting people closer to where they have to work, make it so they do not have to drive at all. And overall, I think I've heard a lot of people touching on points already that are really critical. I don't want to reinvent the wheel here or beat dead horses, but you're thinking in all the right ways already in terms of finding ways to get people closer to where they work and thinking in a more expansive way about what community really is. These are the people that bring you coffee every day, that make your life as pleasant as it is, that keep the economy of the city running. These are the people that you're thinking of when it comes to low-income housing. I know a lot of people think about city character. When you think about city character, think about what makes Carmel, Carmel. It wouldn't be what it is without the tax income from the transient occupancy taxes, from hospitality.
Gabriel, you're going to have to kind of wrap it up here.
Of course, happy to wrap it up. But thinking creatively is what it's going to take. So I'm really grateful to hear everybody who's thinking of it in that way, a positive perspective. And Landwatch is here to support anything in that vein. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabriel. Okay, Victoria, you're up.
Unmute, Victoria.
Sorry, it's a two-step process. I was unmuting and unvideoing. Of course, the usual commendations to the ad hoc committee. I think you guys are doing a fabulous job, and it's tremendous to the way you're running the meetings, and I just applaud you. Karen mentioned something earlier that I hadn't known about, a project, she said somewhere between 7th and Ocean, that has, I assume, she said units that might not even be visible. I think maybe I know which one she's talking about, but I want to encourage, this is in the Department of Ideas, Creative Ideas. I think that the fear factor for what we are sometimes referring to as housing projects is very high in this community. So even the process of identifying sites where we think could be housing, a housing project, is a red flag for this community. However, as most of us know, our city blocks are 400 by 200 square linear feet, which is 80,000 square feet of land on the ground. We already have the height to put in 2 stories above every 1-story building. That's 160,000 square feet of property per block. So we're talking about hundreds of possible units. And I just urge the community to think about, hundreds of units per block. I urge the community to think about this process not as finding places for projects which have been discredited all over America as being recipes for ghettoization and disaster, especially in a low-scale community like this. What we really want, I think, is for individual owners to add a unit or 2, so that each small property has a kind of care and scale to it that is tended to by an individual property owner. So a person who owns a business who wants to put a unit over the store or 3 units over the store. This is how our community was originally designed, and I just implore everybody to think about that as the continuation of a tradition that is tried and true and proven all over the world, and also is the tradition of this community. And it is the easiest way to get to our numbers. That's all I wanted to say. But good job, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria. All right, Lucinda Lloyd.
Thank you, Bobby and Karen, for a wonderful presentation and all the work that you have done. Thank you to Marnie for her really very, very illustrative and clear presentation. For those of us who are not planners, I'm just a local resident, actually a native of Carmel. And it is very helpful for me when the presentations are very clear and gives me a better understanding of what's going on. I won't say anything more except thank you all very much. The planning department's done a great job, city council's done a great job, and the ad hoc committee's done a great job. Kudos. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, that's it. Then thanks everybody for showing up, and the last of you that stayed. And
do we want, I guess we would, as staff, for us as we, trudge on with our consultant, we'd love if either the ad hoc committee has any, follow-on direction from us, or the city council members that are still with us, based on what you've heard tonight, any parting direction for us or thoughts you want to share with us as staff?
Not in particular at the moment. I think it was a good meeting. I would hope that, like I said, I keep saying, this isn't the meeting where we're fighting back. This is the meeting where we're trying to be strong, as Andy said. There'll be a time to fight back. It's just not now.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody who attended, and I'd really like to thank our staff. And Catherine Wallace is over there taking copious notes. She has also been really, really helpful in this. And there are all kinds of things happening around. The AIA presented a program that 4 of us from Carmel were there, I think, 4 or 5, and talking about economics and housing, and they're going to present some more. So you can check on the AIA site for Carmel, and more will be coming up there. There are also incredible resources from AARP, believe it or not, about housing, about ADUs, about making room in America. We do have a changing America. We have single parenting. We have grandparents parenting. We have a lot of different needs coming up in our communities even that, surprise us all the time where things happen. So you can write to AARP or go on their site, and you don't even have to be 55 or over. You can get these wonderful, wonderful booklets. There are some about the ABCs of ADUs. There's just some incredible in their roadmap to livability series. So I urge you to learn all you can about this, read all you can about it. We'll be putting out information as we get it and we learn about it. So this really is a community process, and it is about creating community in Carmel because we have great opportunity here. I was really heartened to hear one of the speakers say we have an opportunity. Let's do it the right way. Let's do it the Carmel way. Let's keep control, and we keep control by having a certified plan. So that's what I have to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Chris, if you're out there still, thank you. Staff, great. Onward and upward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
Carol.